All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about loops. So let's just say I want to write a document that write and say hello. So here, hello is going to come up once, but let's just say I want to loop that several times. So I can theoretically just copy this and paste it several times, as many times as I want, and it'll show up in the list, hello, 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 hello. Okay, that's great. However, I don't want this to happen. I don't want this to happen this way, like so manual. I want it to actually happen in a more optimal way. You can use a loop. So the way that I would do that is take this out. I'll create a for loop. This is one way of doing it. And the way these work, there's a couple things that this does. The first thing that it does, right, is you need to let it know what your start value is. So start value, right? The next thing you want to let it know is the condition for loop, right? So when this condition is true, then loop, right? And the last thing you need to let it know is your increment. And I probably spelled that wrong. Increment. Okay, anyway. All right, so that's the three things that you need to let it tell it to do. So let's just start by giving it the start value. And to do that, you say var I equals 0. So we want it to start at 0. And then I want to say the condition for the loop. As long as the condition is met, it's going to continue looping. So as long as I is less than 5, and then I'm going to create the increment, and I'm going to say I plus plus. And what this is going to essentially say is, well, I plus plus means this is shorthand for increment by 1. Okay, and now if I bring this and I put it inside of these brackets, then hello will show up in a moment 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, right? Because it started by 0. Now let's just see what these values are. What is I? So just to make it a little more visible, in the end over here, let's add a plus, another plus, and a little space at the end, right? If you want the string to have a little space, and inside of those plus signs, sorry, my computer is really struggling right now. I'm going to add an I, and now you'll notice it says hello 0, hello 1, hello 2, hello 3, hello 4, right? So it's writing this, and I is incrementing every single time, starting from 0 until it's less than 5, which is why it ends in 4, because if it was 5, 5 would be equal to 5, and then this would fail, right? So let's just say I wanted to not start with 0. I wanted to start with 1. In order to do that, there's a couple ways. One way would be to create some parentheses and say plus 1, right? And now it's going to start with plus 1. It's going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So I equals 0. This can be 0, but 0 plus 1 equals 1. So that's 1. I equals 1. And then 1 plus 1 equals 2, right? And so forth as it keeps on going. Okay, so that's one way you can do it. The other way you can do it is delete the 1 plus 1, delete that, delete, sorry, it's a little slow, delete that, and then take the 0, the start value, and I don't want to do the math, I'm just going to tell it to start with the letter, with the number 1, so it'll start with 1. But you'll notice here, let's just refresh it, it's going to say 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? I want to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But if you notice, even though I increased it by 1 I, right? So I started by 1, not 0 anymore. It's still, the condition is still the same. So if I wanted to go to 5, then the only way I would be able to do that is to increase this by 6. And we'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. right there. Or I can keep it at 5, and I can say less than or equal to. Right? So add an equal sign. So now less than or equal to 5 is going to say hello 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? So that is how to do for loops, but at any moment I can break the loop. So it's going to 5, but I want it to stop at 3. Right? So how do I do that? So to do that, I will say if I equals 3. So if I equals 3, I want to do something, and all I have to write is break with a semicolon, and there you go. Now it's going to break at 3. And that is for loops. Another way to do this is, let's get rid of this if statement. Right? There's another type of loop that you can use, which people use every once in a while, and that is a while loop. So while loops are a little bit different. While loop don't require all these different values. The way these are written, it's say while. So let's type while and then parentheses, and these work almost identical to if statements. So while something is true, make this happen. Right? So here we can say, well, we're going to just comment out this one. I'm sorry for the slow computer. I'm going to put this in there, and in here you have to, instead of the var, see how the var is inside of this for loop? With while loops, you only have a condition just like an if, so you have to create the var out here. And we're going to say count equals 0, right? And while, the condition I want to say is while count equals 5 or something like that. While count is less than 5, continue doing this. However, you see this thing here? We don't have that within while loops. So what you need to do is you need to grab count, and you need to actually type it in here. Right? So you type it in manually. Right? And now in the while loop you can say count, say less than 5. Right? And now it should show up. There you go. It's saying 6, and the reason it's saying 6 is because if you notice here, I'm still referencing I, and I got iterated up here, so I'm calling the wrong variable. It should be count. Okay, so now it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's correct. Okay, so we talked about breaks, we talked about for loops, we talked about while loops. I mean, you notice with the while loop, it does relatively the same thing. I tend to prefer for loops, mainly because the strictness of it requiring me to write in all these things, like this count plus plus, I mean, so I forget to type it sometimes, and then it takes me a little while to figure out that I forgot. And this will just give me an error. So if something's not there, it'll actually let me know that I forgot. So I typically tend to use this, but this is completely correct as well. And there's a couple others, but these are typically the two main ones that you would use. One thing to keep in mind with for loops, however, is that for loops, they could really kill your it could really bog down your website if you get a little too crazy. So if you want to do things like animation and things like that, then to a limit you might be able to use some JavaScript, but for the most part, if you want to do anything really complex, there's other types of loops that are out there which leverage like the canvas or CSS, We're going to talk a little bit about the CSS stuff later. But yeah, for the most part, that's loops. All right.